When the clock says go, it's time to get ready. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy President's Day to you. Hope that you've enjoyed your President's Day. For those of you who had the day off, I hope that you've got some good relaxation, got some things done, knocked some things off your list. Maybe you've even been able to resurrect that New Year's resolutions list that you have. Some of which you put to the side, but hopefully this day, this extended weekend, the second extended weekend this year, the first being Dr. King's national holiday, gave you an extra day to kind of recoup, regroup, recommit, and move forward. It's been a good day here at our house. We've gotten a number of things done here at home, and we're excited about it. And I'm really excited about getting ready to talk to you about some things that concern all of us, that have affected all of us, most of us in a negative way. But we're going to come up with some solutions today, and I hope that they will be able to help you and to heal you. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Tim Alston, and welcome to the Tim Alston Show. This is the show where we intentionally, deliberately, and without apology, where we seek to educate, where we seek to empower, and also where we seek to equip those who are emerging leaders, but they emerge and they are equipped with what we call God thought leadership. I want to thank my team for working with me, and I want to thank our sponsor. Our sponsor is Shoeshine Media. Shoeshine Media is a video graphic services company that's headquartered in Atlanta, headquartered in Nashville, also headquartered in Huntsville, Alabama. They've helped to make this possible and my training possible. And I'm grateful to them, and particularly their servant leader, their founder director, Javen J. Lewis. What is also the premise of this program is, as always, I want to make sure, my team and I want to make sure that we are able to present current events and newsmakers, but to do that in the light of best practices from the Bible. Let me say that again. Our goals are twofold. Number one, this show, this program, this media ministry is geared to educate, to empower, and to equip those who are emerging leaders, which is the vast majority of us, emerging leaders, but to do it with God thought leadership, not just thought leadership, but God thought leadership. Let this mind be in you, which is also in Christ Jesus. Also, our aim in everything that we do in this ministry, we want to make sure that we present current events and newsmakers in the light of biblical best practices, or best practices, I say, from the Bible. So today is Monday, February 17th, 2025, and I want to pose a question to you. And that question is Trump-xhaustion getting to you too? Are you also getting beat up and worn down by Trump-xhaustion? Well, now there's help, and I've got some solutions for you. Let me be more specific. Is it just me, or why does it seem that these first 4 weeks of the second Trump administration feels more like 12 months, or really 4 months, from this lame duck, term limited president? For example, I mean, there is one loud Trump announcement or pronouncement after another, such as the plans to turn the Gaza Strip into a resort. Okay. I think we need to ask the people in Gaza first. There are the plans that he announced in his campaign to lower grocery costs, and there's been some pushback on that. That has not happened, but I'm getting ahead of myself. And this is the one that got my attention. He had planned to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours, in his first 24 hours. Well, that hasn't happened yet. All of those pronouncements have been only followed by Washington, a White House walkback, and judges ruling that some of these things that he has pronounced simply cannot be done. And so what concerns me and concerns many of us is that there are promises being made, and we are just worn down by what is called Trump-xhaustion. Now, let me do this and do a couple of other things here, and That's not working there. And let's try this here. And let's see what's going on here. Let's open this up here. And let's see what's happening here. Okay, we've got this. And we're going to customize. And we're going to this screen. No, we're not. We're going to this screen. And we're not. No, we're not going to this screen. Well, let's see that it worked before. Let's see if it will work again. That's the joy of being a freshman and learning how to do new things. As I've said, let's see how this works. Okay, now we just have to maximize this screen. And I think that we are in business. Okay. I talked earlier about these Trump pronouncements over and over again, making pronouncements that sounded good enough for him to get elected by 49.8% of the populace. 1 million people voted for him and his ideas. But to date, many of them have not worked. So recently I watched on the Rachel Maddow show that she showed a list, and I hope that you can see it on the screen, a list of the various people that lost elections, either in the primary season or in the general election. And these people, all Republicans, lost elections because the public said, no, we don't want you. We don't want your ideas. No. And rather than listen to what the public has said by voting with their feet or talking with their feet in their votes, what the Trump administration has done is picked up each of these people on this list, garnered from Rachel Maddow's show, and given them all different appointments. For example, Herschel Walker, he lost to Raphael Warnock in the Georgia U.S. Senate race, and he's been given the appointment as being U.S. ambassador to the Bahamas. He was largely unqualified to be a senator, and I'm sure he is largely unqualified to be a U.S. ambassador. And on down this list of all these different people that lost races, but they've been picked up by the Trump administration. Now, what message does that send? I tell you what it sends to me. I spend a fair amount of time in my different church and the different church work globally. And one of the tactics that I see, I'm not proud to admit it, but one of the tactics that I see is when I see leadership in the churches or leadership of the church organization picking up people that have lost races or, as we say, have become victims or prey to challenges with either the monies or the honeys, and therefore they've been picked up by church leadership. And whereas they may be very qualified persons, what I've noticed that happens is they are picked up because they now have an allegiance to that person, that president or that organization head, the executive director, their allegiance to him and less to the organization. It's very much like Trump when he, day one, or maybe it was day two, when he pardoned those 1,600 criminals, yes, criminals from the January 6th insurrection. Gave them a carte blanche clearance, freed them. Some of them were serving time. Some of them were in the middle of sentencing. Some of them were going through court appearances. Some had not even yet made it to court, but he just freed them all, called them freedom fighters, called what they did acts of love. And what he has created, in essence, is a de facto paramilitary group that has a loyalty to Donald Trump. So that's a frightening proposition, but all that has come about as part of the Trump-xhaustion. Now, I also bear in mind the fact with these Trump-xhaustions, other things are happening. You've got all of these executive orders that he's done. It's commonplace for a president to issue executive orders, those things that don't need a vote from Congress or anybody's approval but that of the sitting president. 65 executive orders, most of which done on day one, and most of which were simply to repeal and to revoke executive orders from the former president, Joe Biden, which mainly focused in on diversity and inclusion efforts. Most of them. There were a few that weren't. And one of them that wasn't is executive order. This is one I find the most ridiculous for me. Executive order number 14172. 14172, which was after 500 years of it being named the Gulf of Mexico, he has issued the order to rename it the Gulf of America. Really? I mean, did it need that, or is that just another ego thing to, we understand who we're talking about. And so one of the problems is, Trump-xhaustion. And what is Trump-xhaustion? To me, I call Trump-xhaustion is the wearing down and the subsequent exhaustion caused by this second Trump administration due to its unending barrage of White House activities and initiatives that challenge either the U.S. Constitution or past precedents of best practices or common sense or all of the above. Let me say that again, Trump-xhaustion. I heard this term, I didn't make it up, but it makes a lot of sense. And I hope you understand it too. Trump-xhaustion is the wearing down of us people. It's the wearing down and the subsequent exhaustion caused by the second Trump administration due to its unending barrage of White House activities that challenge either the Constitution, past precedents of best practices, common sense, or all of the above. That's what I define as Trump-xhaustion. It is just constantly wearing down. And so my thesis today is the fact that with a marathon mindset, which is a long-term plan or strategy, with a marathon mindset, the current wave of Trump-xhaustions can and will be defeated. Let me say that again. With a mindset that is marathon-based, a marathon mindset, which is a long-term plan or strategy, we can defeat Trump-xhaustion. We can and will do it. But before we do that, we must be very clear and critical. Before we go down this racetrack for the marathon, we must clear up and face the facts. We must face the facts. Now, I read a very, very interesting article several weeks ago done by an author, a writer for the Washington Post, Tim Craig, and he made the point that he said that what was important was the fact that you've got a lot of people across the country who voted for Trump, who were in favor of Trump, who liked what Trump had said, who believed what Trump was talking about. But the problem is they are now beginning to see that what they voted for and what they believed in is not happening. It's just not happening at all. He focused in on a town in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. And this is a town of people that is predominantly white, that are predominantly low income. Industry has left that town. It used to be a mill city, a city that had mills and factories that produced tin. For a period of time, the industry left that area, and the people were left with little to nothing. But they believed that Trump was going to deliver for them. They really felt he was going to deliver for them. And to date, he is not. And now they are scared, and understandably so. And so what's happening is they have worried about the fact that the person that they put in office, them, and that is a reality. Recently on the Dave Pakman show, they don't understand that what they voted for was a person who sold them a bill of goods. I mean, we've watched this process, and I guess the question I have is, we watched it before in a first term. What made people think that it was not going to happen in a second term? One of my favorite quotes is an anonymous quote that said, "The reason that history repeats itself is that nobody was listening the first time around." Now, these two reporters and these two media persons and talking about the story of people who have now become um, um, increasingly despondent about the person they voted for, it harkens back to me to a very well-known story in the Bible. The story comes from 1 Samuel. Here was a situation. Israel, who had been God's chosen people, brought them out of slavery, brought them through the wilderness, brought them into the promised land, the Canaan land. They began to look around and felt that they needed to have what the other nations had. And let me just pause to say that one of the greatest diseases, one of the greatest killers of people and their ambitions, it's not heart disease, it's not cancer, it's not murder, it's not homicide. One of the greatest killers of people is a disease called comparisonitis, wanting what the Joneses have, not being content with what you have. And so Israel, as a nation, was suffering from comparisonitis. And so they went to their judge, Samuel, and said, we want a king like the other nations. And Samuel tried to talk to them about the fact that, well, look what you have. You have the God of the universe. They said no. And so he, feeling personally bent out of joint, went to talk to God. God had to tell him, hey, it ain't about you, Samuel. It ain't about you. They want a king like the other nations. And the text here shows that when that time comes, you will complain bitterly because of your king, whom you yourself chose, but the Lord will not listen to your complaints. But then the people paid no mind to Samuel, who gave them this pronouncement. They said, no, we want a king, so we will be like other nations, with our own king to rule us and to lead us out to war and fight our battles. And God said, okay, Samuel, it ain't about you. It ain't personal. We will give the people what they want. And so he anointed Saul, who was the first king. And the people chose him, wanted him because he was the tallest of all of the Israelites. He was handsome. He gave a great outward appearance, but he was hollow on the inside. And the people got what they deserved. Does that sound familiar? Are we starting to hear pains of groans from people that the person that they wanted, the person that the majority of Americans voted for, 77 million people voted for, they voted for someone. And let me just break it down for you, having spent years in marketing public relations. What Donald Trump, by and large, meant to the people is he gave the appearance of success. He had buildings named after him. He was on a television show. That's where most people first learned of him. He was a celebrity on TV. Most people desire to have that. He has a plane, his own airplane. He was presumably wealthy. He hobnobbed with the beautiful people. And these people had aspirations to one day be like him. But the reality is most Americans who vote for him will never be able to go and patronize Trump Towers in New York. Most of them will never be able to ride in Trump planes, go to Trump golf courses, become members there. But the illusion of grandeur that he presents, the illusion of wealth, the tall in their eyes, they don't remember the fact that he declared bankruptcy 6 times. They don't remember the fact that he has people loyal to him who went to jail for him, like the 1,600 pardoned people from the insurrection. He paid for none of their legal fees, didn't and won't, because Donald Trump is about Donald Trump. And the sad thing about it is the fact that what is happening now, even at this early stage in his second administration, people are seeing that they got what they deserved. And therefore, they are under the weight of Trump-xhaustion. Now, understand me. This problem is not just happening to white folks. Not just happening to white folks at all, it's also happening to us, who unfortunately stayed home and didn't vote. And the griots, Michael Harriot, the griot is a Black media outlet. It really, as I said, knocked the frustration out of the park. He said turnout was down across the board. Those who voted before didn't vote again. He said, so while Trump got the same number of percentage of Black men to vote as in 2020, the same in 2024, the total number of Black men who voted actually decreased. It was unfortunate. It was unfortunate. Many of our people, and many Americans in general, simply sat out the election. I believe, from watching the media as I did, that it was a tool or strategy, an effective tool of the Trump campaign to keep as many people disenfranchised, to keep as many people disillusioned, disheartened. So they said, it's not going to make a difference. I'm staying home. And he knew if that happened, then he would have the greatest chance of winning. And he did. And so what becomes our solution to all of this? Let me be very frank with you. We have to learn to lie. No, that's not a misspelling. We have to learn to lie. If and when you and I do our jobs and create the marathon mindset, then the Trump administration will have to confront what sociologist Dr. Robert K. Merton described as the law of unintended consequences. The law of unintended consequences. It is that law that says the things that you plan, it says the actions of people, especially those of governments, always have effects, and those effects are either unanticipated or unintended. Anticipated or unintended. One of the best examples that I know of the law of unintended consequences, it comes right out of the Bible, out of the book of Exodus. Prior to Exodus, Joseph, that little shepherd boy, Joseph, son of Jacob, Joseph rose in prominence to become number 2 in the kingdom of Egypt. Through the plans that God put in him, through him, he was able to save Egypt and the world from starvation, from the 7 years of famine, because God put in him the plan to save during the 7 years of prosperity. But as the book of Exodus opens up, the second book of the Bible opens up and tells us, along came a new Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. And in his administration, in his looking around, he said, there are too many of these people from Goshen, even though they're working in our fields. There are too many of them. And if they ever choose to amass their power, they will overtake us. So therefore, we need to put measures in place to make them become less and less and less of a population to us. And so we get the expression brick made with straw. When Pharaoh then made the people of Goshen, the Israelites, work harder and harder, and with less supplies to be successful. It was thought that this hardship would impose a hardship, which it did, but with hope that it would begin to minimize or decrease their population. But you and I know it had an opposite effect. To be real candid about it, when those Egyptian men and Egyptian women would come home from work, they were tired, they were frustrated, and they found their only real consolation in the arms of their wives, in the arms of their husbands. And that increased the population. It increased it so the fact that Pharaoh saw that he had a problem that he created, but his arrogance wouldn't admit that. When I watch, and you and I watch, these issues about deportation and immigration, all it says to me is the fact that there are too many of us people who look like us, who come from our backgrounds, that threaten the majority population, because sooner or later they're going to become not the majority, but the minority. And so therefore, they're going through all kinds of schemes and plans to minimize our population and minimize our strength, voter suppression efforts, getting rid of affirmative action initiatives in major colleges and universities. All of these are efforts to water us down and to eliminate us, quite honestly. But all the hardship did, as I said, was make Israelites a stronger and more populous nation. And that ultimately led to their turning to their God and ultimately becoming free. So the point I want to make is the fact that what I'm proposing to us relative to the mindset of the marathon, what I'm proposing is that we both live fully for today, which is a sprint, and at the same time develop and execute a long-term strategy of the marathon. In so many words, we've got to be able to do two things at one time. We've got to be able to live fully for today. That is the greatest gift God has ever given us. That's why it's called the present. We've got to make today happen. And while we make today happen, we keep an eye toward the future and build toward that to make that happen and to make that a reality. And perhaps Confucius really said it best. Did I do that right? Confucius really said it best. Okay, what's going on here? The slides aren't working like I want them to. And Confucius said, if your plan is for a year, then plant rice. If your plan is for 10 years, then plant trees. And if your plan is for 100 years, then educate children. Or I saw in one place, plant people. Our future is tied into not our children being leaders of tomorrow, but training them to be the leaders of today. And as I've said before in this broadcast, leadership is defined by two characteristics, not titles, not positions. Leadership is determined by influence and relationships. Influence and relationships. And as we begin to learn and grow, we will begin to develop more of those influences and relationships. And the other thing that's very, very key is the fact that we have those influences and relationships right at our own disposal. Now, let me get rogue on you. Let me get a little bit radical with you right now with this concept of the marathon mindset. Let me get real radical with you. I said earlier, we need to learn to lie. Learn to lie. And what I love about this is the fact that I'm not talking about learning to lie like Donald Trump. I mean, according to the Washington Post, he did some 35,000 lies in his first term, and he, on average of 6 misstatements, lies every day. But I want to talk about how we need to learn how to lie. Just need to learn to spell a little bit differently. Okay. Here we have the text, a very important text out of Matthew 5, out of the Bible, the New Testament, Matthew 5, verses 43 through 48. Let me share it with you. You have heard that it was said, love your enemies, love your neighbor, and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, love your enemy. L-Y-E, lie. Get it? Love your enemy. Bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who despitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your fathers in heaven. For he makes the sun to shine on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. And here's an important concept. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? If you only love the lovable, that doesn't take any real effort on your part or my part. If we only love those who are lovable, do not even the tax collectors do the same? Now, the importance of this about the tax collectors is there was no more despised occupation in Israel in Jerusalem than being a tax collector. Why? Because the tax collectors were employed by the overseeing Roman Empire. The Romans who had become the conquerors of Israel and the conquerors of Jerusalem. And so these tax collectors were neo-colonialist, or as we would say, Uncle Toms, and they would often line their pockets with more money than the Romans required of them. But there was really no kind of check and balance. And so they were just hated people, absolutely hated. And that's the reference here. And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Don't also the tax collectors do that? Therefore, you should be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. So we need to learn to lie. We need to learn to love our enemies. And there's a reason why I say this to those of us who are the emerging leaders. The reason I say that is, well, Chuck Swindoll says it best, and it's a very popular quote. He said that we have a choice every day regarding the attitude we will embrace for the day. Life is 10% of what happens to us and 90% how we react to it. Our attitude is everything. What is he saying to us? There are some things that we cannot control. That's that 10%. That's the executive orders from Trump. Those are the mandates from Elon Musk, who is the unvetted, unapproved, de facto co-president, who won't even subject himself to congressional oversight or appearing when he's called before Congress to explain what he's doing, since he is outside of the realm of approvals or nominations or the like. And so we look at this rule. There's nothing we can do but 90% is how we react to it. 90% is what we do to turn that picture around and make it work for us. And we can do that. We have a history of doing it. We've done it all of our lives. Now, I talk a lot about love your enemy, but the question is, who are our enemies? Who are our enemies? I choose, for my purposes, I choose to use the word opponents as opposed to enemies. I think it's a little more soft sounding, a little more euphemistic. And therefore, opponents are those persons, those places, and those things that challenge us, and often in an uncomfortable way. They're like that needle, that one who needles us, I should say. Opponents, enemies. After a while, we'll begin to realize the fact that when we confront these challenges from these enemies, we will find out that enemies or opponents really, really help to strengthen us and make us who we are. For example, no one becomes a winner. No one becomes a champion without enemies or without the ability to have enemies working against them. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, we saw the Philadelphia Eagles become Super Bowl champions. Well, they couldn't have done it by themselves. They had to have an opponent against whom to play, against whom to be judged. No one's going to forfeit the Super Bowl. And so therefore, the Kansas City Chiefs made or helped to make the Philadelphia Eagles. So sooner or later, we as emerging leaders will need to understand that enemies are opponents, and our response to our enemies will make us what we are and make us better. The analogy that I once heard a pastor use and I loved was salmon. I don't know how many of you love salmon. I love salmon. Salmon from the Pacific Northwest was being shipped to the East Coast and to the Southeast for sale. But what the fishermen in the Pacific Northwest began to notice was that when the fish were not selling as well, because when they got to the East Coast, when they got to the Southeast, they had been in large water tanks and they had become inactive or took on a vacation mentality. And they were not muscular, they were flabby, they were not energetic. And so they were not as marketable or as sellable as they typically are. And then, excuse me, and then some of the fishermen got an idea. The idea was the fact that the number one or one of the most critical enemies of salmon are catfish. Catfish. And so what they decided to do was put a catfish or catfish into those water tanks with those salmon being shipped across the country. And something amazing began to happen. Those salmon that had been lazing around on a vacation mode, because the catfish was in the water and was agitating them, they had to move. They had to get away. They had to get agile, hostile, mobile, as the movie Remember the Titans talked about. And so in that process, it kept them moving. It kept them going. It kept them always looking proverbially over their shoulder. And so when they got to their ports on the East Coast, on the Atlantic coast, in the Southeast, these flabby that were once chilled now became muscular, became active like they were when they were in their natural habitats back in the Pacific Northwest. And then they became much more sellable, much more enjoyable, much more marketable. Well, we have catfish in our lives. Sometimes it's a boss. Sometimes it's our children. Sometimes it could even be our spouse. Our job is to recognize and respect the catfish in our lives. Sounds kind of horrible, doesn't it? But we've got to keep agile. We've got to keep moving. We've got to keep in motion. And so we learn to love our enemies, our opponents, because they push us to a level of excellence and to a level of activity. It's been my experience. Now, I'll tell you for the record, I am not a Democrat. I am not a Republican. In so many words, I'm not a member of the GOP, the grand old party, which is the Republicans. I do, in fact, belong to the GOP, which is God's ordained or God-originated party. My only agenda is, my main agenda is serving God first, foremost, and always. As I said, I have no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests, and that's serving God. And that's trying to make things go for him, for his glory. I have one of my favorite YouTube pastors, this pastor, Terry K. Anderson of the Lily Grove Baptist Church in Houston, Texas. And he prefaces every single sermon with this quote: "The grass withereth, the flower fadeth, but the word of our God shall stand forever." That is the only sure thing that we've got. It doesn't matter who's in the White House. Matter of fact, it has been my experience. It's been my observation in terms of Black folk that whenever there is a Democrat in the White House, we spend our time and our energy high-fiving, fist bumping each other. We don't feel that we need to fight as much because we have a friend in the White House. But when a Republican gets elected and occupies the White House, then he or she becomes for us that catfish, agitating us, causing us to have second thoughts about this and pushing us off of our beds of ease. And so sometimes we are better off with our enemies or our catfish or our opponents in the White House than not. Well, that time has now come. And we've got to rely upon some certain principles and some certain ethics and some certain strategies that we've got to use and put in our life. And like Terry Anderson said, the word of God stands forever. And we've got to, Thomas Jefferson said, I like the way he said, in matters of style, swim with the current, but in matters of principle, stand like a rock. One of my favorite hymns has its refrain, on Christ the solid rock I stand. No, all of the ground is sinking sand. And so we've got to develop the mentality that we've got to keep moving and we've got to keep going because the struggle is on. We spent a lot of time during the Obama administration high-fiving and fist-bumping each other, feeling that we had made it to the promised land, feeling, as the media said, that we were in the post-racial era. No, it's not true. Not true at all. Matter of fact, we're about to see some things roll back to force us into a sense of reality. And we need to say thank you, not to these opponents, not to these catfish, but thank God for these opportunities to get our acts back together. And the two key things that we really, really, really need to do in terms of our marathon mindset is not so much focus in upon individual elections, do part of that, yes, but really look down the road beyond the sprints to the marathons. The two most powerful tools that we have going for us, and I'm saying this in conclusion, two most powerful tools we have are our children and our opportunity to vote. Our children and our opportunity to vote. I'm like you. I was that parent just like you. I'll never forget back in 2007, thinking about Moses at the burning bush, thinking about it when God said, "What is that in thine hand?" Use what you've got. And the tools that we've got are our children and our ability to vote. Back in 2007, I'll never forget coming home one evening and our daughter, who was 4 years old, maybe 3 years old at the time, her mother, my wife at the time, was going over her Bible verses with her and said to me, she said, and as I listened to her recite them, my wife said, I think she's ready to learn Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. So, huh? She said, yes. So every morning I would take our daughter to school in the mornings, most of her life until she learned to drive and then purchased her own car with her own money and paid it in full. But I said to my 3.5-year-old, I said, do you want to learn the I Have a Dream speech? She said, yes, Daddy. I said, okay, we need a strategy. I love this story. I said, what did Daddy tell you? I said, Daddy told you that life is hard by the yard, Daddy, and it's a cinch by the inch, Daddy. I said, life is hard by the yard and cinch by the inch. So every week we will learn a new and different sentence of the I Have a Dream speech. How does that sound? It sounds fine, Daddy. And so every morning on our way to and from school, we work on that sentence, Then the next week we will learn a new sentence and add that new sentence to the old sentence. And we just kept stacking and stacking and stacking. And then as it turned out, a couple of months later, I was asked to be the keynote speaker at a nearby Calhoun Community College for their commemoration of Dr. King's birthday. And I went to speak, and my wife and I decided that would be a great opportunity for our daughter to get experience as a public speaker. And I decided that if she's able to join me in doing that speech, then I will give her a portion of my speaking honorarium. And that was a very high moment for us as a family, because then our daughter was able to, at that time, She was able to end my speech at Calhoun Community College at age 4 by reciting, with a little help from Daddy, the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech. Well, that was so exciting for us. It was her first public speaking, professional speaking engagement. And there also was a voter registration table set up by my fraternity brothers, the Brothers of Alpha Phi fraternity. And caught up in that moment, Morgan's mother, my wife at the time, then registered as a voter for the very first time, and then said to us, we're going to Washington. We're going to the inauguration. We're going there. And so that became our theme that year, this inauguration, this event. And even it became our Christmas greeting cards, looking at our daughter as being one day a future Barack Obama in the year 2048. Little did we realize that along was going to come a Kamala Harris. And so what was interesting is that we went to the inauguration, bundled up in that sub-freezing weather. Matter of fact, as you can see here, one of the newspapers from Pennsylvania captured our little daughter on top of Daddy's shoulders, there for that inauguration. I don't think she remembers a lot about it, but she had the experience, and our job is to educate our children. And speaking of Kamala Harris, later, our daughter went away to college and then chose to pledge in the sorority of which Kamala Harris is also a soror. And so I believe sincerely that caught up in the momentum of 2024, that she then registered to vote, but I don't know. This generation of young people don't feel they need to vote. They don't see the importance of the vote. They don't understand, people bled and died. And they will tell you that's nice, but that wasn't me. I can't relate to that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that next week in terms of how we move beyond celebrating Black history to take that next step. And so because our key to that marathon mindset, and I'll be talking about this throughout the year in these different episodes, is we've got to focus in on today, doing things today, but also with a mindset on preparing down the road for doing things on tomorrow. Fair enough? That's the way we're going to get over Trump-xhaustion. It's there. It's going to be there. He's lame duck. He's setting things up for his future. We've got to set things up for our future. We've got to play the long game. We've got to be sprinters and marathoners. Too often we've only been sprinters. But now, with God's help, with examples from the Bible, with current events and newsmakers like they are, we need to develop a marathon mindset. Hey, thanks for sharing time with me, spending your time with me this afternoon. I hope that you've enjoyed this show. I hope that you are using this show, the Trump-xhaustion Show, as your weekly guide for information and inspiration. And what I'd love for you to do is not just enjoy this show, but also if you enjoy it, don't just keep it to yourself. Don't just hoard it to yourself, but subscribe to the channels, like it, and share it with others. And we'll look forward to seeing you next episode when I talk about celebrating Black History Month. What's next? Celebrating Black History Month. What's next? Thanks again for joining us. And remember, if this information and if this inspiration is becoming to you, then you should be coming to us. And if you want to get more information from me, you email me directly at info@timallston.com. Thank you, and God bless you.